Hi, everyone. Jonathan Alexander here with the Los Angeles Review of Books. And I am really happy today to have with me Eric Nguyen, who is the author of Things We Lost to the Water, a novel that I have a particular fondness for, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But first, Eric, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So this is a lovely, complex novel about a Vietnamese family, mother and two sons, who, what was the word? We use the word refugees, right? They were refugees from the end of the Vietnam War, and the novel starts in the late 70s with the mother who's relocated with her sons to the New Orleans area and trying to make a life. How did you come to write about this particular family?
Well, for the longest time, I tried to write a Vietnamese refugee story. I tried to get inspiration from my own parents, but they never really talk about their past. So I felt like the novel form, the fiction, was a great way to kind of explore that, this kind of knowledge that I didn't know. And from there, kind of create this family, this fictional family that was partly my experience just growing up as a Vietnamese American, as a gay man as well. And then partly just completely fiction. I got to know like the Vietnamese community in New Orleans, and they inspired my own work. And at the end, just came together to be like this multi-point of view novel.
Yeah, and it is from multiple points of view. We definitely get insight into the different characters. The mother, her two sons, one Tuan, who goes on to join a kind of gang in the area and has his own arc, and then the son Ben, who is also sort of grappling with his sexuality and develops a love of literature. Terrible question. Is he the stand-in for you?
I get asked that a lot, and I mean, like, part of it is kind of like he is similar to me, like love literature, his queerness. But really, I feel like he became his own person through the writing. I mean, like, he dropped out of school. Like, I didn't drop out of school. So it's like there are very obvious things that do not parallel with my own life story. So no, I would say maybe there are bits of me in there, but to me, like, he's a totally different character, a totally different person from myself.
Which absolutely makes all the sense in the world. And I really appreciate the chance to talk with the writers specifically about what I think of as an almost alchemical transformation, that you might borrow a little bit from your own life in the conceptualization of a character, but they quickly do come to have a life of their own. You're writing specifically about not just a family migrating, a family of refugees, but also a family having to adapt to a very different part of the world, and also a character, Ben, who is on top of all of the politics of migration, all of the politics of racism too, having to grapple with his sexuality, which is not really appreciated by his family. Is this an important story, and why tell this story now? Because it does feel like a really emerging story for us. Thinking, of course, everyone was talking a couple of years ago about Ocean Vuong's On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous. What is so powerful about this story in this particular moment?
I think it's powerful partly because, like, for a long time there wasn't a lot of not a lot of Vietnamese representation in the first place, and to say nothing about queer Vietnamese representation. So I think, like, I follow that lineage, I guess you could say, of like queer Vietnamese writers. You said Ocean Vuong, there's like Human Tran, Paul Tran. So like there is a movement out there of queer Vietnamese writer. And I feel like this story is part of like making up for all that lost time, but also think that it kind of shows diversity in the South that we don't really have a lot of like insight into. I mean, like, when we think about the South, we think about Black, white, we think about that Southern pride. It might be just the Bride and Place, and then also that long history of the Civil War and that outcome and that legacy. But I wanted to tell the story to show like Asian people belong in the South, queer people belong in the South. So I think it's important to show that diversity in the story, because true to life, like when I was in Louisiana, like there was more diversity there than I, as a Northerner, would expect, and I think that was a pleasant surprise.
I love it. So I'm so glad that you're talking about the South and about New Orleans in particular. I grew up in New Orleans, and so really, in so many ways, could connect with these characters, not only because of the rich ways in which you talk about New Orleans, but also the movement towards Hurricane Katrina, which appears at the end of your book, and my family was very adversely affected by it. But also because you hit on something so important. I constantly tell people, I've lived in many different parts of the country now, and I constantly tell people that the best Vietnamese food I've ever had in the US is in New Orleans. And they're always surprised to find out that New Orleans actually has a very large Vietnamese population. And I think there are many reasons for that. So I really appreciate you capturing that sense of community, which I got to know a little bit by working as an English teacher within that community. Can you say a little bit more about the complexity here of writing about a queer character, a queer Vietnamese character specifically in New Orleans? Because I often get asked, well, you're from New Orleans, that must have been a wonderful place to grow up queerly. And I'm like, it has pluses and minuses. So I'm kind of curious about your sense of that and how you grappled with writing a queer Vietnamese character in New Orleans.
For me, like the queer community, from what I at least learned from it, I mean, like any other places, it's always been there. And I mean, like modern day today, New Orleans, there's a good population of queer people, there's gay bars and whatnot. But I think like the further we go back in time, like you see how difficult it is to be a queer person, and add on the layer of being a person of color. I mean, like there was violence against queer people down there. Like I think in the 60s, there was like that fire, someone set a fire to a gay bar. So there's that's only kind of a glimpse into the homophobia that's kind of there. And then the racism in the South in America, in New Orleans. I think in the 80s, a Vietnamese man was murdered in New Orleans, I think New Orleans East. And I think just that convergence, those layers, that intersectionality is worth exploring, because again, like we don't get a lot of that in a lot of the, I guess, mainstream media, the stories that we've been told ourselves. And I think, I hope like I add like nuance to what it is to be a South, what it means to be queer in the South, what it means to be a person of color in the South. And I think like there are many more stories out there, and we just need to listen.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also something that I think will connect kind of a way of writing that will allow the particularity and specificity and nuance, to use your word, of what you're talking about to connect with a lot of different people. One of my favorite passages was when you were writing about how Ben wanted Howie, and the narrator here writes, "Wanting, what a strange feeling, what a queer idea to have toward another person. You could want food, you could want rest, you could want safety, and it dawned on him, you could want a person too." And I love that. What a queer idea to have toward another person. Do you have anything you want to say about that particular passage? What were you thinking when you wrote it, or how does it strike you now, hearing it?
I think from coming from this perspective of a queer kid, of a refugee, I think like refugee, that status is always linked to survival. Like you need to survive somehow in this new country. You left the country to survive. So when you think of survival, you don't think about love, really. You think about food, shelter, just trying to get to another day. I think that moment was I guess the time it clicked that love is part of that survival, that you need, if not love, that human contact is really important. I think that what kind of makes him kind of different from his mother. His mother is really single-minded in her like her want to have that stability. Even her own relationship is kind of I wouldn't say cold, but maybe not as passionate as other relationships would be. So I think for him, like he learns that to survive, you need food, you need clothing, but you also need contact with other humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's really very moving. Part of what makes, I think, anyone living in New Orleans a potentially precarious subject is the position of the city, not only below sea level, but subject to increasingly violent weather. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your experience of writing about Katrina. And again, not to give away what happens over the course of the book or how it ends, but anything you want to say specifically about writing about Katrina, which I personally understand as someone from that area. It's not only a natural catastrophe, but also a political catastrophe in so many ways. So one that made refugees of citizens of this country within their own country. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience, about why was that an important moment to write towards?
I think throughout my whole writing of the novel, I felt like New Orleans was specifically, like Louisiana in general, was, I mean, I wouldn't say ideal, but like the Vietnamese refugee story kind of go hand in hand with like the Louisiana experience. I mean, like both know that water is kind of a sort of livelihood. Even like you have people in Louisiana who depend on the water, like fishermen, depend on water for like income. And then you have people in Vietnam who fled Vietnam by water. So that parallelism in water, that's something that's necessary for survival. I think both populations can see the value in that. But then at the same time, both populations can also see the dangers in water. Leaving by boat in the middle of the sea, like you could die, and many people did die trying to flee Vietnam. And then you have people in New Orleans who are kind of living on the edge. They every hurricane season, something bad might really happen. In the case of Hurricane Katrina, like the whole city like was kind of destroyed, and people did leave. There was that refugee experience as well, or at least that experience of moving away and not knowing when you'll come back. So I think it just made sense for the Vietnamese American story to take place in New Orleans, just because there's so many parallelism. And also I think both populations really understand each other in that way.
That's right. You finished your degree at McNeese State?
Yes.
What was that like? Because this is maybe not a college that is probably too widely known outside of that area, but one that I'm very fond of, being from Louisiana. What was that experience like for you?
For me, at first it was kind of a culture shock. I mean, I come from DC, which is a sizable city, I guess, and then I went to Lake Charles, where McNeese State University is, and it was very quiet. And like there's that famous like Southern hospitality. People are really friendly, and like I that was a surprise for me. I mean, a pleasant surprise. So that was good. It was always that trying to get used to that small town culture I had to get used of, and like going down there as a person of color, I always felt I thought that I would like have some discrimination against me. Like I was ready for that, but like nothing like that happened at all. I felt like the community down there was really welcoming to me as a person of color, as a queer person. I remember like my first time in a bar, like I told someone like, a guy, I was gay, and then he's like, he went away, he didn't say anything to me, then he came back and was like, hey, it's wonderful that you're gay. And like, it's a place that I didn't see myself being there for a long time, but I really like value my time there, and I do have like a special love to the area.
That really comes through in your writing. Tell me, is there a writer, an artist, someone inspiring you right now, someone you could recommend to people listening to us?
The book I return to a lot is Lee Tran's House of Sticks. It's a memoir about basically coming to the US as an immigrant, as a poor immigrant, and it really does a great job depicting life as a poor immigrant and how one travels through that, and eventually in her case how one succeeds, but also has that connection to the past. So I really like that book, and I think for me just inspiration really comes from like visual art. So like Rothko is one of my favorite. I think there's something soothing about his work, just because like it's abstract, so you could kind of project your own feelings onto that. So I think at least that's for me, that's helpful.
You know, I love that you said that. I was actually just in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago for a conference, and at the National Gallery of Art, there's that wonderful room you can get to in the East Wing, which is just Rothko's basic. Well, I think there may be another artist there, but it's this lovely little area. It looks like a little hideaway chapel. So love it. Thank you so much. I've been talking with Eric Nguyen, who's the author of Things We Lost to the Water. Eric, thank you so much for connecting with me about this book and about the experiences you had in Louisiana and about these really, really interesting, complex characters. I appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a wonderful time, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me.